good evening and welcome. Tonight I'm going to be reading to you from this book about the Maori of New Zealand. So let's just dive right in because this book is really great. The Maori of New Zealand. Who are the Maori? The Maori are the original inhabitants of New Zealand, a small island country located far south in the Pacific Ocean. The Maori came to New Zealand as long as 1,500 years ago. They traveled in canoes from Tahiti, the Cook Islands, and other Pacific islands. The people of the South and Central Pacific Islands are known as Polynesians. The modern Maori. The Maori number about 500,000 people, or about 15% of the population of New Zealand. More than 3/4 of Maori live in New Zealand's large towns and cities. About 20,000 Maori live in the nearby country of Australia. Maori hold jobs in all areas of the workforce and share fully in the modern New Zealand lifestyle. Very few Maori live the traditional lifestyle of their ancestors. Recent decades, however, have seen a revival of interest in Maori culture. Many Maori are learning to treasure their culture. They want to keep it alive for future generations. Land at the bottom of the world. New Zealand covers an area of 103,710 square miles. It contains two main islands, the North Island and the South Island. The islands hold a wide range of beautiful landscapes, including long sandy beaches, snow-capped mountains, and volcanoes. Diverse landscapes. The islands that became New Zealand were once part of a great southern continent called Gondwanaland. Over millions of years, this continent began to break up and drift apart. It eventually became many separate land masses, including present-day Australia, Antarctica, and New Zealand. The North Island. About 3/4 of New Zealand's people live on the North Island. Auckland, the largest city in New Zealand, is located in the northern part of the North Island. Fertile farmlands lie south of Auckland in the Waikato River Basin. The eastern coast of the island is home to dense forests, orchards, and vineyards. In the middle of the North Island lies the beautiful Bay of Plenty region. It boasts clear lakes and geothermal features such as hot springs and geysers. The North Island's most southern city is Wellington, the capital of New Zealand. The South Island. The South Island is the larger of New Zealand's two main islands. On the island's east coast, the Canterbury Plains contain fertile farmland. In the northern part of the island, fertile soil and a good year-round climate provide the ideal environment for growing grapes to be made into wine. The island also features 8 national parks. The South Island is often called the Jewel of New Zealand because of its stunning scenery. The island holds the snow-capped Southern Alps, clear lakes surrounded by towering mountains, unspoiled native forests, and sunny beaches. It has breathtaking fjords, deep, narrow bays that cut into the coastline, often with mountains rising up on each side. It also has slow-moving ice sheets called glaciers. Geothermal action. New Zealand is full of geothermal activity. The word geothermal means earth heat. It refers to heat energy from the inner core of the earth. Magma, hot molten rock at the center of the earth, can reach temperatures of 12,632 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 7,000 degrees Celsius. Hot springs and geysers. When underground water comes close to magma, the water boils. Steam and hot water sometimes escape upward through cracks in the earth, creating hot springs at the Earth's surface. Some hot springs throw up jets of hot water and steam. These springs are called geysers. Hot springs and geysers are found throughout New Zealand. The Maori once used hot springs in their daily lives for activities such as bathing, washing clothes, and heating their homes. Explosive mountains. Sometimes magma itself bursts up through openings in the Earth's surface. These openings are called volcanoes. Most volcanoes take the form of mountains. New Zealand's North Island contains several active volcanoes. Mount Ruapehu is the highest mountain on the North Island. It erupted as recently as 1996. Mount Garohoi is New Zealand's most active volcano. It has erupted 61 times since 1839. Apologies if I butchered that name. I'm sure I did. A volcanic island. Sitting about 30 miles off the North Island's east coast, White Island is actually a volcanic mountain. It is the largest volcano in New Zealand, but 70% of it is underwater. The plants of New Zealand. Many types of plants and trees grow in New Zealand. About 80% of them are endemic to New Zealand, meaning they are found nowhere else on Earth. The country has many national parks that help preserve and protect much of this plant life. Forest lands. Forests cover about 25% of New Zealand's land area. Beech forests are the most common. These forests feature 5 different kinds of beech trees. Shrubs grow beneath the trees, and the forest floor is carpeted with ferns. Kauri forests, dominated by the massive kauri tree, are mainly found on the western side of the North Island. Potukawa trees grow along the rocky western coast of the North Island. Ferns galore. More than 150 types of ferns grow in New Zealand. In fact, the fern leaf is one of New Zealand's national emblems. One of the most common ferns is the bracken fern. It was once a source of food for the Maori, who loved to chew on its stem. Conserving nature. Almost 300 kinds of plants and animals in New Zealand are in danger of extinction. Pollution, the logging of native forests, and the spread of towns and cities have destroyed many wilderness areas. Pests such as opossums, rats, wild pigs, and wild cats have also destroyed plant life in many areas. In recent decades, New Zealand has begun many programs to protect wilderness areas and endangered species. New Zealand wildlife. The first Polynesians to arrive in New Zealand brought dogs, rats, pigs, and a kind of chicken called the moa. The pig and the moa could not adjust to the weather in New Zealand, which is colder than most other Pacific islands. These animals did not survive, but the Maori found a tall, flightless bird in their new home. They named this bird Moa, after the chickens that had perished in the cold. The Maori soon hunted the moa to extinction. Land of birds. Modern New Zealand is home to hundreds of different types of birds. Some of them, such as the kiwi and the weka, are unable to fly. The kea, a type of large parrot, lives high in the mountains. The tui has dark, glossy feathers and pure white feathery tufts at the throat. Oceanic birds, such as the albatross and the petrel, are numerous in New Zealand. Shore birds like the dotterel are also common. Millions of sheep. European settlers arriving in the mid-1850s brought sheep to New Zealand. The New Zealand Romney is the most common type of sheep in New Zealand. It makes up around 60% of the sheep population. First introduced to New Zealand in 1858, the Romney provides good wool for making carpets. Merino sheep are also highly prized for their wool. Insects and reptiles. New Zealand is home to a number of interesting reptiles and insects. A lizard called the tuatara is a relative of the extinct dinosaurs. Tuataras can live to be 70 years old. The weta, a type of grasshopper, is New Zealand's largest insect. Wetas can measure up to 4.5 inches in length. They are often found in gardens, woodsheds, and basements. About 2,000 species of spiders live in New Zealand. The only poisonous type is the katipo, which lives under rocks and around sandy beaches. The Great Migrations. Travelers from other Pacific islands first reached New Zealand as early as 1,500 years ago. Historians are not sure why they came to New Zealand. Their home islands might have become overpopulated, or food might have run short, causing the people to look for a new home. Maori legend says the first Maori set out from the island of Hawaii in a fleet of 7 canoes. It is said that all Maori people can trace their origins back to travelers in these canoes. Surviving the voyage. These first New Zealanders were expert sailors. They traveled across the vast waters of the South Pacific Ocean in fleets of double-hulled canoes, or 2 canoes connected by a platform. Each canoe could carry up to 35 people. It had sails woven from coconut leaves. The travelers navigated by the stars. To survive, they carried provisions of dried and salted fish, fresh pig, dog, and chicken meat, coconuts and other kinds of fruit, and roots such as sweet potatoes. A different land. The early Maori settled on the northeast coast of the North Island. As more canoes arrived, people began to settle on other parts of the North Island and on the South Island. The newcomers faced hardships in their new land. They had come from warm tropical islands. In New Zealand, the sea was cold. The weather changed dramatically with the seasons. The foods people had grown on their home islands, kava, coconut, and bananas, would not grow in New Zealand. A new world. In New Zealand, the Maori settlers found many natural resources to help them in daily life. They found wood that was excellent for building houses. They used flax plants and bird feathers to make clothing. They made knives from obsidian, a dark volcanic glass. The Maori soon learned the habits of New Zealand's birds and fishes, which they killed for food. They learned which berries were safe to eat and which ones were poisonous. They developed a 12-month calendar, which helped them grow crops according to the seasons. Conquering the interior. For the first few hundred years of settlement, Maori people lived around the top and bottom of the North Island and along the coasts of the South Island. These areas were easy to reach by canoe. They had large populations of moas and seals, which the Maori hunted for food. Eventually, all the moas along the coast were killed. Hunters had to travel farther inland to find more of these big birds. People began to settle in New Zealand's interior. There's a picture of them right here, or a depiction of what they would have looked like. From hunting to farming. By the 1600s, the Maori had developed a complex society with its own religion, laws, and leaders. Different tribes inhabited different regions. Tribes sometimes warred with one another. By then, the moa had almost been hunted to extinction. Seals had also been killed in great numbers. People began to turn to farming as a way to get food. European contact. The first European to sail close to New Zealand was a Dutch adventurer named Abel Tasman. Tasman reached the North Island in December 1642, but he sailed away after a violent dispute with some Maori on board his ship. In 1769, English explorer James Cook reached New Zealand. The first European settlers soon followed. White settlers. The first European settlers were sealers. They set up camps along the South Island coast in the 1790s. The Maori called the Europeans Pakehas. Most of the settlers were British. They brought new tools, animals, and crops to New Zealand. They also brought diseases that the Maori had never known before: tuberculosis, venereal disease, measles, and influenza spread rapidly through Maori villages. These diseases caused a 50% decline in the Maori population between 1820 and 1920. The Treaty of Waitangi. More and more British settlers arrived in New Zealand. They bought land from the Maori for almost nothing. The idea of selling land was foreign to the Maori. They believed that the settlers were just borrowing the land. In 1840, the British government signed the Treaty of Waitangi with 45 Maori chiefs. Under the treaty, the Maori gave New Zealand to the British Empire. In return, the Maori were guaranteed rights to their land and were given the rights and privileges of British citizens. The Land Wars. But the British did not honor the treaty. In the 1840s and 1850s, the British government forced the Maori to sell more and more land. Fights sometimes broke out between Maori and white settlers. In the mid-1840s, Maori chiefs Honeheke and Koiti led a rebellion against the British in the Upper North Island. They won some spectacular victories before they were defeated. Wars raged on through the 1870s. Eventually, the British defeated the Maori. 20th century changes. By the beginning of the 1900s, the Maori population had fallen from about 200,000 to just 42,000. The average lifespan for a Maori was just 28 years for a woman and 24 years for a man. The Maori suffered from disease, unsanitary living conditions, impure water, and poor health care. Sorry if you can hear my upstairs neighbors walking around. Many New Zealanders, Maoris and whites alike, felt something needed to be done to improve Maori life. The Young Maori Party. In 1897, students at Teote College, a school for young Maori men, met to discuss ways to help the Maori people. Over time, this group evolved into an organization called the Young Maori Party. The group wanted to improve life for the Maori in areas such as housing, healthcare, education, and employment. Some remarkable leaders emerged from the Young Maori Party. Aparana Gata served in New Zealand's parliament. Maui Pomare was a doctor who led a national program to improve the health of Maori people. Leaving the land. Life improved for the Maori after World War II. Because of the work of Maui Pomare and other leaders, Maori began to receive better health care. The Maori population began to grow rapidly. Many Maori people moved from rural areas to cities after the war, mainly in search of work. The protest years. When Maori moved to the cities, they often lost touch with their cultural and family heritage. Many young Maori were no longer aware of Maori legends and traditions. Fewer Maori spoke the Maori language. The Maori also suffered from social problems, including unemployment and poverty. In the 1970s, groups of Maori organized sit-ins and demonstrations. They wanted to bring Maori problems to public attention and to protest the loss of the traditional Maori way of life. The Waitangi Tribunal. In 1975, the New Zealand government formed a commission called the Waitangi Tribunal. This 16-member group, made up of whites and Maoris, allows the Maori to make claims when they believe that the 1840 Treaty of Waitangi has been violated. For instance, in 1982, the Tātiawa tribe challenged the right of a petrochemical company to discharge waste into coastal waters near the tribe's homeland. The tribunal found that the coastal reefs and shellfish belong to the Maori people. As such, they are protected under the Treaty of Waitangi. The trading economy. Before the arrival of Europeans, the Maori had no form of money. People in different villages bartered or traded for the items they needed. Maori from coastal areas would often travel inland to exchange foods like dried shark and other ocean fish for freshwater fish. Other valuable trade items included obsidian and greenstone, a semi-precious stone. European trade. The arrival of Europeans in the late 1700s changed the Maori economy. The first European sailors brought many new goods to the Maori, including iron gardening tools, fruit trees, and crops like wheat, corn, and potatoes. In exchange for these items, the Maori gave the Europeans timber, flax, woven goods, and carvings. By the 1830s, some Europeans were working as middlemen between white and Maori traders. These men were called Pakeha Maori. They normally married Maori women and lived in Maori villages. From trade to warfare. White settlers established farms and ranches across New Zealand. They were hungry for more and more land. In the late 1800s, disputes over land erupted into warfare between Maoris and whites. When war broke out, the trading economy between the Maori and the whites collapsed. The modern economy. Most modern Maori live a typical urban lifestyle. Maori work in all sectors of the New Zealand economy. Many hold factory or construction jobs, but others work as politicians, lawyers, doctors, teachers, athletes, actors, police officers, and scientists. The Maori still struggle with poverty, however. Maori people are 3 times more likely than non-Maori to be unemployed. The average Maori family earns $10,000 less per year than the average non-Maori family. Closing the gaps. The New Zealand government has introduced a range of programs to help Maori people achieve the same living standards as non-Maori. These efforts are called the Closing the Gaps program. The government has also helped Maori people start businesses in areas such as tourism, fishing, and dairy farming. New businesses. In many cases, the Waitangi Tribunal has required the New Zealand government to pay Maori tribes for land that was taken from them unfairly. As a result of these payments, many tribes have large sums of money to invest. Some tribes have started new Maori-owned businesses, especially in the areas of agriculture, horticulture, and tourism. These businesses provide jobs for thousands of Maori. The tourist trade. Many Maori work in the tourism industry, and tourists in New Zealand are eager to learn about Maori culture. The city of Rotorua, in the middle of the North Island, is popular with tourists. Visitors there can enjoy Maori concerts, visit traditional Maori villages, and feast on Maori foods. Rotorua also has many geothermal wonders, such as geysers, boiling mud pools, and hot waterfalls. Traditional homes. The vast majority of Maori live in modern-style houses in the city. In rural areas, however, a few groups still live like their ancestors did. They live in wooden houses surrounding a communal meeting house. These structures are similar to the dwellings of the early Maori settlers. Evolving homes. When the Maori first arrived in New Zealand, they moved frequently to follow the moa flocks. Because they moved often, they did not build elaborate homes. They built simple huts consisting of circular wooden frames covered with palm leaves and grasses. Eventually, starting around the 1500s, moas became scarce. The Maori traveled less and less. They eventually became farmers and built permanent settlements, including elaborate wooden houses shaped like upturned boats. The Warepuni. The Warepuni, or sleeping house, was a rectangular building with sunken floors and walls about 4 feet high. Doors and windows were made as small as possible and fitted with sliding covers to keep in warmth. The Waripuni housed a wanao, or extended family, which could include up to 24 people. A fireplace inside warmed the home. People slept on mats woven from ferns and flax. Storage and cooking houses. Dried fish and other foods were kept in a storehouse, carved with beautiful decorations. The house was built on raised poles as protection from rats. Another storehouse held highly prized tools, weapons, feathered cloaks, and food offerings for the gods. Food was prepared in a separate structure, or outside in an underground oven. The kainga and the pa. The first Maori villages were called kaingas. The typical kainga was home to several wanaus, for a total population of about 50 people. The kainga was surrounded by a fence, with a garden beyond. These early villages had no defensive walls or ditches. The village garden. The villagers grew mostly kumaras, a type of sweet potato, in their gardens. Other food crops included fern roots and cabbage trees. The ground was carefully prepared with digging sticks. Sand and ashes were added to the soil to make it more fertile. Fortified villages. Over time, enemies began to raid kainga gardens, so people began to build fortified villages called pas. A hilltop, ridgetop, or cliff was a good site for a pa, since the site could be easily defended. Villagers built ditches, terraces, and stockades around pas for defense. The inside of the pa was divided into small, walled-off sections, which meant that attackers, if they managed to get inside the pa, had to fight for each section. Traditional Maori society. In Maori creation myths, men were said to be the children of the god Tane. That made men tapu, or sacred. Since men were sacred, they could not carry anything on their backs. Women had to carry heavy loads. Men could work only on sacred projects, such as building canoes and planting crops. Men were also the carvers and fishermen of the village. Maori women tended the gardens, gathered wild plants, cooked and collected firewood and shellfish. Women descended from chiefs were the village weavers. Social divisions. Maori tribes were divided into several social classes. The most important person was the high chief. He traced his ancestry directly from the gods. Then came the chief's immediate family and others who had achieved high rank through their accomplishments. The priest was next in rank. He determined which people and places were sacred. He was also responsible for remembering and telling the tribe's history. Skilled artists and warriors were the next class. They were followed by the common people, the ones who worked the land and cooked the food, the lowest in rank or slaves captured from other tribes. Also, you might be able to hear a wind chime outside. It's one of my neighbors. Nothing I can do about the wind. Private property. Most items within the village belonged to everyone who lived there. A man had a few private possessions, however, including a greenstone mere, or fighting club, and a fishhook. A woman might possess a special piece of clothing, some handmade jewelry, a stone used to prepare food, and a pair of carved sticks used for weaving. Changing traditions. Modern Maori are fully integrated into New Zealand society. The vast majority of Maori live in cities, yet ties to home villages remain strong. Urban Maori often return to their tribal lands for funerals, weddings, and family reunions. There they embrace the traditions of old. Maori in government. He's walking around, sorry. Maori society is no longer governed by chiefs. Instead, modern Maori participate in all levels of New Zealand government. 5 seats in the nation's parliament are reserved for Maori representatives, but Maori actually hold many more seats. In fact, Maori representatives make up about 20% of the 120-member parliament. When it comes to tribal issues, Maori elders are the spokespeople for their communities. New leaders. A number of Maori have emerged from the academic world and the Maori protest movement. Weena Cooper was a leader in the movement for Maori rights. In the 1950s, she founded the Maori Women's Welfare League, a group that worked to improve life for Maori women. Another leader was Rangini Walker, a professor of Maori studies at the University of Auckland. Cultural revival. The 1990s saw a huge revival of interest in Maori culture, especially among young Maori. Schools began to teach the Maori language. It also joined English as an official language of New Zealand. A new generation of Maori embraced traditional Maori arts such as carving and weaving. Internationally acclaimed Maori writers, including Witi Ihumera, Alan Duff, and Carrie Holme, described Maori culture in books. Maori television shows also contributed to the revival of Maori culture. Dress and decoration. Modern Maori wear Western-style clothing, similar to styles worn in Europe and the United States. Maori wear traditional outfits only on special occasions. But these clothes are still a very important part of Maori culture. Some modern fashion designers even use Maori images and patterns in their clothing. Men's attire. For working or fighting, Maori men wore only breech cloth at the waist. For formal occasions, men wore various kinds of cloaks and capes. One kind of cloak was made from flax fiber, decorated with strips of dogskin and hair. Men also wore ornaments around their necks and feathers or greenstone earrings in their ears. Men typically wore their hair in a top knot. They usually dyed their bodies with a red dye made from ochre, a kind of iron. Women's wear. For Maori women, everyday dress consisted of a girdle of braided flax cord around the waist with a fringe of leaves in front. Women also wore skirts made from strands of dyed flax. On formal occasions, women wore beautifully decorated capes made of flax fiber or dogskin. The wonders of flax. More than 60 varieties of flax grow in New Zealand. The long green leaves of the plant contain strong white fiber. The Maori used the fiber to make warm clothing. European settlers used the fiber to make rope. The Maori often traded flax with Europeans. The Maori also used flax for medicine. Flax oil was used to heal wounds. The art of the Maori. The Maori have always been an artistic people. Warriors decorated their faces with swirled tattoos. Other traditional arts included carving and weaving. Maori weaving. Maori women used flax to weave sandals, skirts, cloaks, baskets, and mats. They decorated their weavings with dyes made from berries, as well as with feathers and dog hair. Women also wove wall coverings, which were decorated with diamonds and other symmetrical shapes. Modern artists still practice traditional Maori weaving arts. The carving tradition. The first Maori in New Zealand found high-quality timber for building their homes. The wood of the totara tree was especially easy to split and work with stone tools. Men carved designs into the logs used to make walls, doors, and pillars. The most popular image was the human form, with a realistic face with complex tattoo markings, but an out-of-proportion body, too small and squat. Scary-looking figures with tongues poking out were placed at the entrances to Maori fortresses to frighten enemies. Modern Maori carvers have kept the old traditions alive. Maori carvings are popular with tourists. A song for every occasion. The love of song is common among Polynesian peoples. For the Maori, singing is a way of expressing feelings, as well as a way to pass on history and myths. The Maori had songs for every occasion: love songs, chants and prayers to the gods, songs to welcome visitors, and to a marae. Some songs were thought to have a spiritual and mystical force. Song and dance. Dancing and singing were inseparable in traditional Maori culture. Villagers gathered to sing and dance in the evenings. On important occasions, such as the welcoming of visitors from another tribe, the village's best performers would dress in their finest clothing and ornaments to dance and sing. Both men and women performed. Those who excelled were greatly admired. Action songs. Hakas were Maori action songs. Singers used their hands, feet, legs, bodies, tongues, and even eyes to help impart the song's message. The Maori had many different types of hakas, each with its own purpose and style. The haka mai mai, for example, was performed during the period of mourning for the dead. The haka pirori was performed to avenge an injury or insult. It was accompanied by actions that showed contempt for the watchers. The language of the Maori. The Maori language is part of the Polynesian family of languages. It is closely related to languages spoken in the Cook Islands, Tahiti, and Hawaii. The Maori language, along with English, is one of the national languages of New Zealand. Their other national language is sign language. It's really cool. The oral tradition. The Maori have passed down stories, songs, myths, and legends from generation to generation over hundreds of years. The tohunga, or priest, was the main villager in charge of remembering and telling history. Many priests had amazing memories, especially when it came to remembering genealogies or family trees. The written language. Before Europeans came to New Zealand, Maori was an unwritten language. Storytelling and singing were the only ways to pass on history and legends. European missionaries, or religious teachers, were the first ones to write down the Maori language. They began to translate the Bible into Maori as early as 1814. English professor Samuel Lee came to New Zealand in the 1820s. He worked closely with several Maori chiefs to write down the language using the Roman alphabet. Forbidden language. In the 1880s, large numbers of Maori children began attending European-style schools. There, Maori students were punished for speaking their own language in class. In the early 1900s, many Maori parents encouraged their children to learn English instead of Maori. These parents thought that speaking English would help their children succeed in New Zealand society. Soon, the numbers of Maori who could speak their own language dropped dramatically. Revival. In the mid-1980s, Maori leaders became increasingly aware of the risk of losing their language. They established 5 schools called language nests to teach Maori to preschool children. The program was an immediate success. More than 800 similar schools were then opened around New Zealand. These centers are very important in keeping the Maori language alive. The Maori spirit world. Religion played a role in every part of pre-European Maori life. Even the most routine tasks had to be carried out properly according to religious beliefs. If not, the gods would be angered. Many gods. The Maori were polytheistic, meaning that they worshipped many different gods. Tongaroa was the god of the sea. Tane was the god of forests and trees. Rangi was the god of the sky. Some gods were friendly, but all of them were capable of awesome displays of anger. Sickness, accidents, and death were all seen as signs that the spirits were unhappy. The work of missionaries. The first English missionaries arrived in New Zealand in 1814. They wanted the Maori to practice Christianity instead of their traditional religion. At first, the Maori rejected Christianity. In the late 1820s, however, things began to change. Missionaries were seen as messengers of peace, providing a bridge between Maoris and Europeans. The missionaries also helped the Maori obtain medical treatment, food, and supplies from the Europeans. Because of the missionaries' goodwill, Maori soon converted to Christianity in great numbers. Maori prophets. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, several Maori prophets started new religious movements that mixed traditional and Christian beliefs. Horopapera Tuhuakakaro began a movement called Paimarire, good and peaceful, in 1862, after he dreamed of visitations by the Archangel Gabriel. Another prophet was Ruakanana, born in 1868. He built a religious community at Mangapohatu. I'm like falling asleep right now. Mangapohatu. At its peak, it had over 1,000 members. T.W. Ratana, born in 1870, converted many Maori to his church. It is still a part of the religious landscape of New Zealand. Feasts and festivals. Festivals and ceremonies have always been a big part of Maori life. Some ceremonies were performed to please the gods and spirits. Others were held purely for entertainment. The Maori still hold festivals and ceremonies as a way to preserve their cultural traditions. Kapahaka. Many Maori belong to performing arts clubs called kapahakas. There, members perform action songs, war dances, and other traditional dances, as well as the Maori women's traditional karanga call, a shrill, high-pitched call of welcome. Clubs compete against each other on the local, regional, and tribal levels. The hangi. The highlight of many gatherings was the laying of the traditional Maori hangi, or feast. Using paper, wood, and stones, villagers built a fire in a large hole in the ground. When the stones were white hot, villagers poured water on them to produce steam. Food was then steam cooked for several hours. Chicken, pork, potatoes, pumpkin, and kumara were favorite hangi ingredients. A special celebration. In 1990, the Maori commemorated the 150th anniversary of the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi. As part of the celebration, participants built wakatawas, traditional war canoes. Originally, these canoes were 60 to 100 feet long and could hold 30 warriors. The modern-day canoe builders used the traditional construction process. They made the canoes from massive kauri logs filled with elaborately carved stern and bow pieces. The canoes were launched in elaborate traditional ceremonies. Oh, that's the end of our book for tonight. Well, thank you so much for watching. I do hope that you found this video relaxing and educational. I'm going straight to bed. That book made me so sleepy. Thank you again, and I hope that you have a very good night.